By the time the local news crew finished filming, the entire parade had been transformed from a routine civic event into a moment of national recognition. The video of 2,000 Marines stopping mid-march to salute an elderly veteran would be viewed by millions, and Frank Morrison would finally receive the honor he had earned decades earlier on a Pacific island most people couldn't pronounce. But it all started with one simple fact. Sometimes the most important people in a community are the ones everyone walks past without seeing. Memorial Day morning in Millfield, Pennsylvania dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes small-town parades feel more like duty than celebration. By 9 a.m., Main Street was lined with folding chairs, American flags on wooden sticks, and families who had claimed their spots early to get the best view of the annual procession. Frank Morrison, 87, had been wheeled to his usual position at the corner of Main and Elm at exactly 8:30 a.m., just as he had for the past 15 years. His wheelchair sat at the very edge of the sidewalk, close enough to see but positioned where he wouldn't block anyone's view or take up valuable space that families with children might need. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had helped him get ready that morning as she did every year. She had pressed his old Marine Corps dress blue uniform, the same one he'd worn to his retirement ceremony in 1978, and made sure his Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Silver Star were pinned correctly to his chest. The uniform hung loose on his frame now, a reminder of how much weight he'd lost since his wife Eleanor passed away 3 years ago. "You sure you want to sit out there in this weather, Frank?" Mrs. Patterson had asked as she adjusted his collar. "It looks like it might rain." "Same spot every year, Helen," Frank had replied quietly. "Someone needs to remember." But as the parade participants began gathering and the spectators filled in around him, it became clear that Frank's presence had become as invisible as his voice had grown quiet. Families set up their chairs without acknowledging him. Children ran past his wheelchair chasing parade candy without a glance. Parents positioned their kids directly in front of his view without asking if it was okay. Frank didn't complain. At 87, he had learned that asking for attention felt too much like begging, and Frank Morrison had never begged for anything in his life. He sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap, watching as his community prepared to honor fallen heroes while completely ignoring the living ones sitting right beside them. The Millfield Memorial Day Parade had followed the same route for 43 years. It started at the high school, proceeded down Main Street, and ended at Veterans Memorial Park, where Mayor Davidson would deliver a brief speech about sacrifice and service before everyone went home for barbecues and family gatherings. This year's parade featured the usual participants: the high school marching band, the volunteer fire department, 3 surviving World War II veterans in a convertible, local Boy Scout troops, and the Millfield VFW post. But the centerpiece of the parade was something special. A full Marine Corps ceremonial unit from nearby Quantico, 2,000 Marines in dress blue uniforms marching in perfect formation to honor the community's military heritage. At 10 a.m. sharp, the parade began. The marching band played the Battle Hymn of the Republic as they passed Frank's corner, their music echoing off the storefronts and mixing with the cheers of the crowd. Frank watched with the practiced eye of someone who had once marched in formations like this, noting the precision of their steps and the pride in their bearing. The fire trucks came next, their sirens wailing and lights flashing, followed by the convertible carrying the 3 World War II veterans. Frank recognized 2 of them, Jim Crawford from the Pacific Theater and Bill Santos from the European Front. Both men were in their late 90s now, their uniforms decorated with ribbons that told stories most people had forgotten. As their car passed, Jim Crawford spotted Frank in the crowd and raised his hand in a small wave. Frank returned the gesture, a moment of recognition between 2 old soldiers that went unnoticed by everyone else on the street. But the real shock was still coming. When the Marine Corps ceremonial unit came into view, marching in perfect 8x8 formation, something in the atmosphere changed. These weren't local reservists or veterans from the VFW. These were active-duty Marines from Quantico, their dress blues immaculate, their bearing sharp, their movement synchronized with military precision. Leading the formation was Gunnery Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had been selected to command ceremonial duties because of her exemplary service record. As the unit marched down Main Street, she maintained her forward gaze while simultaneously scanning the crowd with peripheral vision, a habit developed from years of combat deployments. It was Rodriguez who first spotted the elderly man in the wheelchair. At first glance, Frank Morrison looked like many of the spectators lining the parade route, an old man watching the proceedings with polite interest. But something about his posture caught Rodriguez's attention. Despite his age and his seated position, Frank sat with military bearing, his back straight, his hands positioned precisely, his eyes tracking the formation with the practiced attention of someone who understood what he was seeing. Then Rodriguez noticed the uniform. Even from a distance of 30 feet, she could see that Frank wasn't wearing a costume or a replica. The dress blue uniform was authentic Marine Corps issue, and it was worn with the kind of precision that only comes from years of military service. The ribbons on his chest weren't souvenir shop decorations, they were real medals, positioned exactly according to military regulations. Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. Without breaking stride or disrupting the formation, she issued a command that only the Marines could hear. Eyes right on my command. Dress blue uniform, wheelchair, corner position. Prepare to render honors. The command rippled through the formation in the way that only highly trained military units can manage, invisible to civilians, but instantly understood by every Marine in the formation. 200 Marines continued their march while simultaneously preparing for a maneuver that wasn't part of the original parade plan. As the formation approached Frank's position, Rodriguez could see more details that confirmed her suspicion. The uniform wasn't just authentic, it was old enough to be from the Vietnam era or earlier. The medals weren't just decoration, they included a silver star, which meant this man had demonstrated exceptional gallantry in combat. And most importantly, the way Frank was watching the formation showed the kind of professional appreciation that only comes from someone who had once been part of the Brotherhood. 20 feet from Frank's position, Rodriguez made the call that would transform the entire parade. Formation halt. 200 Marines stopped as one, their movement so precise and instantaneous that the sound of their boots hitting the pavement in unison echoed like a gunshot down Main Street. The sudden stop was so unexpected that the crowd fell silent, confused by the deviation from the planned parade route. Right, face. Every Marine in the formation turned toward Frank Morrison, creating a wall of dress blue uniforms facing the elderly man in the wheelchair. The precision of the movement was breathtaking. 200 individuals moving as a single entity, their attention focused solely on the old veteran who had been sitting unnoticed at the edge of the crowd. Frank's eyes widened with surprise and recognition. In his 43 years of attending this parade, nothing like this had ever happened. The formation was facing him, acknowledging him, seeing him in a way his community had forgotten how to do. Rodriguez's voice carried clearly across the silent street. Present, armed, 200 Marines raised their right hands in perfect synchronization, rendering the sharpest, most precise salute that Main Street had ever witnessed. The movement was so crisp and unified that it seemed choreographed, but it was driven entirely by respect, recognition, and the kind of institutional memory that civilians often lack. Frank Morrison sat in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by the moment. His own right hand trembled as he raised it to return the salute, his arthritis and age making the movement slow and difficult. But every Marine maintained their salute until Frank completed his, showing the patience and respect that military protocol demands when honoring a fellow service member. The crowd around Frank was stunned into silence. Parents stopped talking. Children stopped running. Everyone on Main Street was witnessing something they didn't fully understand but could feel was significant. Cell phones came out as people began recording what was clearly a spontaneous moment of military honor. After 30 seconds of held salutes, an eternity in military terms, Rodriguez commanded order, arms. The Marines lowered their salutes in unison, but they remained facing Frank. Rodriguez then did something that went beyond military protocol and entered the realm of personal respect. She stepped out of formation, approached Frank's wheelchair, and spoke in a voice loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. Good morning, Marine Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. On behalf of every Marine in this formation, it's an honor to salute you today. Frank's voice was hoarse with emotion as he replied, Corporal Frank Morrison, retired. Thank you, Gunny, Semper Fi, Corporal, Rodriguez responded, and the phrase was echoed by Marines throughout the formation. Semper Fidelis, always faithful, the motto that binds Marines across generations and conflicts. Rodriguez looked down at Frank's ribbons and understood immediately what she was seeing. The silver star meant this man had distinguished himself in combat. The Purple Heart meant he had been wounded in service to his country. The other medals told a story of multiple deployments, exemplary service, and sacrifice that his community had forgotten. Corporal Morrison, Rodriguez said, would you do us the honor of leading this formation to the Memorial Park? Frank looked confused. Gunny, I'm not sure I understand. Sir, every year we march to honor the fallen, but today we'd like to march to honor the living. Would you allow us to escort you to the memorial? The crowd was close enough to hear the exchange, and murmurs of appreciation began rippling through the spectators. For the first time, Frank's neighbors were seeing him not as the quiet old man in the wheelchair, but as the decorated Marine Corps veteran he had always been. Frank nodded, his eyes wet with tears he hadn't expected to shed. It would be my honor, Gunny. Rodriguez returned to formation and issued new commands. Formation will march in escort formation. Dress right, dress, ready, march. The Marines repositioned themselves around Frank's wheelchair, creating an honor guard formation with Frank at the center. Miss Patterson, who had been watching from across the street, hurried over to push Frank's wheelchair, but one of the Marines gently took her place. Ma'am, we've got him, the young Marine said with a smile. Today the Corps takes care of our own. The transformed parade proceeded down Main Street with Frank Morrison at its center, surrounded by 200 Marines who had recognized what his community had overlooked. The crowd followed, many of them beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical Memorial Day parade. As they walked, Rodriguez learned more about the man they were escorting. Frank had enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1954 and served tours in both Korea and Vietnam. He had been wounded twice, decorated multiple times, and served with distinction for 24 years before retiring as a sergeant. After leaving the military, he had worked as a machinist at the local factory, raised 3 children with his wife Eleanor, and lived quietly in Millfield for over 4 decades. Corporal Morrison, Rodriguez asked as they walked, have you been attending this parade every year? 15 years, Frank replied. Since Eleanor passed, Mrs. Patterson helps me get ready and wheels me down here. I like to see the young Marines march. Reminds me of when I could do that. Sir, you're still doing it. You're marching with us today. When they reached Veterans Memorial Park, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the usual brief ceremony with Mayor Davidson's speech, the event became a celebration of Frank Morrison's service. Rodriguez asked Frank to join her at the memorial platform, and with the help of 2 Marines, his wheelchair was lifted to the stage. Mayor Davidson, who had been mayor for 12 years and had delivered countless Memorial Day speeches, found himself at a loss for words. He had walked past Frank Morrison hundreds of times over the years, knew him as a neighbor, but had never known his story. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor began, his voice uncertain, I think we're all learning something important today. Sometimes the heroes we need to honor are right here with us, and we just need to remember to see them. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez stepped to the microphone. Corporal Morrison served 2 tours in combat, was wounded in service to his country, and has been quietly living among you for decades. Today, the Marines came to honor him because that's what Marines do. We take care of our own, but this community should be taking care of him too. The crowd, which had grown as word spread through the town, listened in respectful silence. Many people were learning for the first time that their quiet neighbor was a decorated combat veteran. Rodriguez continued, every community has veterans living among them. Some are young, some are old, some are visible, and some have become invisible. But they all served, they all sacrificed, and they all deserve to be remembered and honored, not just on Memorial Day, but every day. After the ceremony, something remarkable happened. Instead of the usual quick dispersal after the mayor's speech, people began approaching Frank. Neighbors who had walked past him for years introduced themselves and thanked him for his service. Children asked to see his medals. Young people wanted to hear his stories. Miss Patterson, who had known Frank for 15 years but had never fully understood his military background, tearfully apologized for not doing more to honor his service. "Frank, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have asked." "Helen, you've done more for me than anyone," Frank replied. "You help me every year. That's service too." The local newspaper, which had sent a photographer to cover the routine parade, found themselves with the biggest story of the year. The photo of 2,000 Marines saluting Frank Morrison became the front page of the next day's edition, with the headline, "Our Forgotten Hero." But the real story was just beginning. The video footage shot by parade spectators began appearing on social media within hours. The image of Frank sitting alone, ignored by his community, followed by the moment when 2,000 Marines stopped to salute him, struck a chord with viewers across the country. The video was shared thousands of times with captions like "This is what respect looks like," and "How to honor a veteran the right way." National news outlets picked up the story within. Frank Morrison, who had lived quietly and invisibly for years, suddenly found himself at the center of a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. The attention brought some uncomfortable truths to light. Interviews with Frank revealed that he had been struggling financially since Eleanor's death, that he had been dealing with health issues related to his combat service, and that he had been largely isolated from his community despite living there for decades. "I never wanted to be a burden," Frank told a CNN reporter. "I never wanted special treatment. I just wanted to be part of the community I served." The story sparked a broader examination of how small communities across America were failing to recognize and support their veteran residents. Frank's experience wasn't unique. It was representative of thousands of elderly veterans who had become invisible in their own neighborhoods. But the Marines' spontaneous act of recognition also sparked something positive. Within a week of the parade, Millfield established a veteran outreach program. The VFW Post, which had been struggling with declining membership, saw an influx of younger veterans who wanted to be part of an organization that looked after its members. Local businesses began offering veteran discounts. The American Legion started a program to identify and support elderly veterans in the community. The high school implemented an oral history project where students interviewed local veterans and recorded their stories for posterity. Frank Morrison became the reluctant face of a movement he never asked to lead. But with Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez's encouragement, he began speaking at veteran events, schools, and community gatherings about the importance of recognizing service and supporting veterans. "It's not about the parades or the ceremonies," Frank would tell audiences. "It's about remembering that veterans are part of your community year-round. We're your neighbors, your coworkers, the guy at the grocery store. We don't need special treatment, but we shouldn't be invisible either." 6 months after the Memorial Day parade, Frank Morrison received a letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, officially recognizing his service and thanking him for representing the Corps with dignity throughout his retirement. The letter was accompanied by a challenge coin, a Marine Corps tradition, and an invitation to visit Quantico as an honored guest. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been promoted after the ceremony, personally escorted Frank to Quantico, where he was given a tour of the base, met with current Marines, and shared his stories with young recruits who were just beginning their military careers. "You never know when your service is going to matter," Frank told a group of new Marines. "I thought my war was over 40 years ago. But it turns out, sometimes the most important battle is just being willing to be seen." The following Memorial Day, Millfield's parade looked very different. Frank Morrison rode at the front of the parade, not in his wheelchair but in a place of honor in the lead vehicle. Behind him marched not just the ceremonial Marine unit from Quantico, but veterans from every branch of service, representing every conflict from World War II to Afghanistan. The crowd was different too. Instead of families walking past veterans without acknowledgment, there was active engagement. Children waved flags specifically at the veterans. Adults thanked them for their service. The community had learned to see the heroes who had been living among them all along. Frank Morrison lived for 3 more years after that transformative Memorial Day. When he passed away in 2027 at the age of 90, his funeral was attended by hundreds of Marines, community members, and people from across the country who had been touched by his story. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, now a Master Sergeant, delivered the eulogy. Frank Morrison taught us that heroism isn't just about what you do in combat, it's about how you carry yourself when you come home. It's about maintaining your dignity when you're forgotten, your honor when you're ignored, and your faith when you're invisible. Frank Morrison was a Marine for 24 years, but he was a hero for 90 years. The Memorial Park in Millfield now features a statue of Frank Morrison in his wheelchair, surrounded by Marines rendering salutes. The plaque reads, "In honor of Frank Morrison and all veterans who serve in war and wait in peace, may we never forget to see the heroes living among us." Every Memorial Day, Marines from Quantico still march in Millfield's parade, and every year they stop at Frank Morrison's statue to render honors to the man who taught them, and an entire community. That respect isn't something you earn once and keep forever. It's something you give and receive every day, in the simple act of recognizing the dignity and worth of those who have served. The wheelchair that Frank used for 15 years of Memorial Day parades is now displayed in the Millfield Historical Society, along with his uniform and medal. But more importantly, the lesson he taught, that heroes often live quietly among us, waiting to be seen, has become part of the community's identity. Today, Millfield, Pennsylvania is known across the country as a model for how communities can honor and support their veterans. It started with one man in a wheelchair that no one noticed, and 200 Marines who remembered that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply salute.